Hey gang, this week's episode is brought to you by oldschoolshirts.com. Hey, check them out. You like defunct teams and leagues and t-shirt form? Well, you'll find them there, but a whole bunch of other stuff too. Do you remember a radio station of the past or perhaps a mall that you used to go to? All kinds of great cultural and sports memories can be found at the great folks at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. And now, here's our show.
Got him. The greatest game ever pitched in baseball history by Don Larson. A no-hitter, a perfect game in a World Series. Never in the history of the game has it ever happened in a World Series. Only the second time in baseball history, a World Series, where a perfect game has been pitched. 64,517 have seen it. Millions more on television. Don Larson pitches a perfect game, retiring 27 Dodgers in a row. It is 9:46 p.m. 2-2 to Harvey Keene. One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung out and missed. A perfect game.
One ball and no strikes. Aaron waiting. The outfield deep and straight away. Fastball is a high drive into deep left center field. Buckner goes back to the fence. It is gone. What a marvelous moment for baseball. What a marvelous moment for Atlanta and the state of Georgia. What a marvelous moment for the country and the world. A black man is getting a standing ovation in the Deep South for breaking a record of an all-time baseball idol. And it is a great moment for all of us, and particularly for Henry Aaron.
And look who's coming up. All year long, they look to him to light the fire, and all year long, he answered the demands. And with two out, you talk about a roll of the dice. This is it. High fly ball into right field. She is gone! In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Well, hello. How are you, everybody? It's Tim Hanlon back and in the saddle again and reporting for duty. It is Good Seats Still Available. Yes, that's the podcast you have found. Our little weekly journey into what used to be in professional sports. Thank you for finding us. We appreciate it, as always. Well, I'm not too sure that we need to do too much prep for those clips that you just heard. Needless to say, we're going to be focusing our efforts this week on the one, the only, the late, great Vin Scully, an extraordinary broadcaster in baseball. But as we'll discover with our guest this week, Tom Hoffarth, who has a wonderful new book out called Perfect Eloquence, an appreciation of Vin Scully, which is comprised of dozens of essays, first-person memories from a whole wide range of people across media and religion and just fans and baseball and broadcasting and all these kinds of things. An extraordinary talent, Vin Scully, for many, many decades, and not just baseball, as we'll find out in our conversation. You'll soon learn, if you didn't know already, that football is actually one of his first loves, both from a broadcasting perspective and just the speed of play. But of course, baseball, and in particular the Dodgers franchise, both Brooklyn and Los Angeles versions, very much entwined with the Scully legacy. But as you heard in some of those clips, this is a guy who's been around, who had been around for quite some time and is revered as perhaps one of, if not the all-time greatest broadcaster of the game of baseball, but sports generally. In order, you heard is very early years. I want to say he was in his maybe mid-20s in 1956 when he stepped into the NBC television booth alongside Mel Allen, in that case for Game 5 of the World Series of 1956 between the Yankees and the Dodgers. Not the one the Dodgers won, of course. That was the year prior in 55. But the Game 5 of 56 World Series, Don Larson in his perfect World Series game. That was an early and very young, but clearly quite talented Vin Scully calling that on NBC television. Then the second clip you heard was his call in September of 1965 on the LA Dodgers radio network KFI in Los Angeles, being the flagship station of such, alongside Jerry Doggett, the Sandy Koufax perfect game with the Dodgers. Eloquently described, as you can imagine, and as remembered. The third clip, 1974, who could forget that? The 8th of April, if you remember where you were, when Hank Aaron hit his 715th home run, breaking Babe Ruth's longstanding record at the time. That also on the LA Dodgers radio network, this time rooted at KABC in Los Angeles alongside Jerry Doggett. And no more eloquent a call and context delivered there by Vin for that momentous event on a bunch of different levels. And the last one you heard, for people of a certain age, 1988, the first game of that World Series on October 15th, 1988. That's when, for NBC television, you heard Vin describe the gimpily adept and able Kirk Gibson, then of the Dodgers, and a dramatic bottom of the ninth, one man on two, I think it was one out, walk-off home run that gave the Dodgers that first game against the Oakland A's, and a more dramatic call between the pictures and his audio call you will never probably find in modern day baseball. All pieces of evidence of the wondrous talent and skill and dexterity and knowledge of the great Vin Scully, as we talk with our guest this week, Tom Hoffarth, about Scully's life and legacy. And this is not a book that is purely biographical by any stretch. This is, as you'll hear in our discussion with Tom, another sort of layer of understanding of the man as understood by people who knew him best or well, or even were just influenced by him that perhaps he never met. And it's interesting that we delivered this episode for you when we do this week in late June, as we record this yesterday. Actually, it was the day before yesterday, the passing of one of baseball's all-time greats, Willie Mays. Now, he never played for the Dodgers. Obviously, he was a Giants guy, mostly. Clearly, the Birmingham Black Barons, of course, in the Negro Leagues. But the New York Giants and then the San Francisco Giants, and then later the New York Mets for a couple of cups of coffee. But we'll post in our show notes, as well as in our social media feeds this week, a tremendous clip that we just found that showcases Vin meeting Willie for the first time. I want to say it was in the early 2010s, maybe a couple of years before Scully retired. I think that was 2016. And it's not a tremendous audio clip that I could use for air here. But if you see this clip in video and the link that we have in our show notes on our website, goodseatsstillavailable.com, as well as in social media, you will see Vin describe to Willie, almost embarrassingly so, just how much Vin Scully admired Willie Mays, despite the fact that he never played for the Dodgers. And to see Vin Scully in his near retirement age gushing over a sheerly gobsmacked Willie Mays, it's a sight to see, and that clip is well worth seeing. So go find that if you dare. Let's see, while you're online, again, our website, goodseatsstillavailable.com, probably the perfect place to purchase said book, Perfect Eloquence and Appreciation of Vin Scully, which we'll be talking about in a second. Just search up this episode number 352 with Tom Hoffarth, and you will find a convenient link to it via Amazon. All right, so while you do that, why don't you sit back, relax, pull up a chair, and maybe a cool, tasty beverage, and enjoy, hopefully, this wonderful conversation with our new pal, Tom Hoffarth, who's the editor, if you will, or the chief instigator of this wonderful collection of essays. Let's go back and appreciate the wondrous voice and skill of baseball and sports broadcasting legend Vin Scully. As always, please enjoy. So maybe you can give our audience a bit of a sense of who you are first and foremost, and then a little bit of a hint of your adjunct into this story that is Vin Scully that you put together.
Oh, sure. And I've been a sports writer in Los Angeles for more than 40 years. I went to USC journalism school, and one of the first professional sports I covered was the USFL in the mid 80s. So I'm all up to speed on the LA Express and Steve Young. And even before that, I covered the North American Soccer League with Johan Cruyff and George Best. So, I mean,
we should talk about that kind of stuff for sure.
Yeah, I've got a great collection of experiences with that, with the LA Strings and the Arena League. And so, but I was mostly involved in sports and the media as a sort of, media. That was my beat. So I covered the broadcasters in the beginning of ESPN. Again, when I'm looking at some of the things you did, I want to read this book now about the origin of ESPN, because I had to go back there and do the 20th anniversary story of their existence. And I remember some stories too about things that they covered here on the West Coast. It was just bizarre to see this, 80-foot truck trying to weave its way into Pepperdine University to cover a basketball game late at night. It just seemed like, this is not going to end well. But then to understand, like, this was the ESPN thing, it was kind of an interesting thing to watch kind of emerge and grow. So as I'm covering all sorts of things, the sports and the media was kind of my beat. So, I mean, back into the 90s, I started interviewing Vin Scully for different stories and things. And then I so I ended up with about a 30-year run of interviewing him off and on for stories, and then just got to know him more and more personal. So that's kind of where I'm approaching it. And it's all with the Southern California News Group, which started out to be the Daily Breeze in Torrance, California, and then the LA Daily News out in the San Fernando Valley. And since then, it's merged into the Orange County Register and the Riverside Press Enterprise. So it's become this bigger than life thing. And but since I was part of the newspaper employee purge off and on, it's given me time the last 5 years to kind of pull my notes together and pull this book together. So that's kind of how it got to this point with the book.
Well, as a former journalist myself, I had some time at CBS News back in the day, college, a little bit of Sports Illustrated when I was in college, internship and stuff, and Washington Post stuff, stringing. Completely tangential to this conversation. You're an LA guy then, pretty much through and through for most, if not all, of your career, right?
Absolutely, from birth to now. I've never lived anywhere kind of outside this 10-mile range of Los Angeles, including being born in Los Angeles in '61 when the Los Angeles Angels were first born, and just knowing my parents went to Wrigley Field and just to see the Hollywood Stars play earlier than that, and the SEA Games at the Coliseum and Dodger Stadium, and it's just being born here. I just feel absorbed in the DNA of sports here, and Vin Scully has just been the soundtrack forever. And in reading some stories about him back when Sports Illustrated did a piece on him, like in the early 60s, it realized that this was such a place of destination for so many people from different parts of the country that Vin's voice was really the only constant that they had. And at that point, he'd only been here 5 or 6 years, and to see him do a career that's 67 years long just with the Dodgers, but also branched off into national sports with Major League Baseball and the NFL and golf, but really he was still the soundtrack of Los Angeles sports. And to hear his voice still on Dodger broadcast, either introducing the game or in drop-ins with commercials and things, it still feels natural to hear his voice connected with that.
Yeah, so give non Southland listeners a bit of an understanding, frankly, of some of that. You had the luxury of having essentially grown up with him in your earbuds, or however you were ingesting radio and over-the-air broadcasts over those years and stuff. So you've said it before, as sort of the soundtrack of, but he was just as much a voice of that region as he was of the Dodgers and baseball and sports, right? I mean, there are a lot of very famous names that have come and gone in the Los Angeles entertainment field and in the sports arena, but his is probably, I guess, pretty close to about as Mount Rushmore as you're going to get in that area and beyond.
Yeah, and it's almost like Bob Costas was saying once that it was one thing that Vin happened to be at the biggest events, but he actually made those events even bigger. And it was a lot of it by chance. He was doing a Dodger game, whether it was 1974 when he's doing Henry Aaron's 715th home run. That wasn't even the national broadcast. That was just the Dodger radio broadcast. So Vin's call of that event is well preserved. But even doing the 1988 World Series for NBC, it just happened that the Dodgers were in that World Series and Kirk Gibson happens to hit that home run. And Vin Scully just happens to realize the moment is there and sort of sets up that whole inning. And it's incredible when you go back and recap to talk to him about how that whole game one of that World Series even came about, where he was sort of helping direct the cameras to show that Kirk Gibson wasn't on the bench and he's not going to play. And Gibson hears him in the locker room and says, "Heck with that, I'm going to come out and play and see what happens." But just from the Mets Red Sox World Series of '68, the ball gets through Buckner.
5-5 in a delirious 10th inning. Can you believe this ball game at Shea?
Oh, brother.
3-2 to Mookie Wilson. Little roller up along first, behind the bag. It gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it. If one picture is worth 1,000 words, you have seen about 1,000,000 words. But more than that, you have seen an absolutely bizarre finish to Game 6 of the 1986 World Series. The Mets are not only alive, they are well.
And there's so many calls that people remember, whether it's the catch in the 1981 NFC title game with the San Francisco 49ers, Joe Montana to Dwight Clark.
For one of the rare times, what they thought was going to be a barn burner is exactly that. And of course, for the upstart 49ers, they're 6 yards away from Pontiac. 3rd and 3.
We'll see a pickup sometime on the right side, possibly.
Montana looking, throwing in the end zone. Clark caught it! Dwight Clark! It's a madhouse at Candlestick with 51 seconds left. Dwight Clark is 6'4". He stands about 10 feet tall in this crowd's estimation.
It's just amazing at how many events he happened to be to and then took to another level just by knowing the importance of the storytelling. And some people here in Los Angeles say that maybe Sandy Koufax was the best athlete or best known sports person. And it really was because of Scully, because Scully elevated Koufax to this mythical position, and especially with his 1965 perfect game, the way Scully narrated that last inning, it's on so many recordings, and people hear it and don't realize that he was doing this live. It's not some script he was reading. And so when I'm pulling this book together of essays about Vin Scully, all these different stories come out about what people remember of him, and mostly it's about him as a storyteller, him as a broadcaster, him as a person who loved history, a person who connected generations. But I think the more I dug into his life and his commitment to his family and his religious beliefs and his sincerity, it was such a nice book to pull together for that, for generations to come after us. They'll remember that this person who existed between 1950, when he was first doing his first game, Connie Mack was in the last year of managing the Philadelphia A's. So here's a guy who went from 1950 all the way to 2016 as a broadcaster and spanned all these generations. And when he passed away in 2022, my immediate goal was to just capture as much of this as we could, because he had such a small private funeral, and a lot of people wanted to do these eulogies for him and just talk about what he meant to them in their life. So that's kind of how, and as the puzzle kind of put together, that's kind of how the book came together. And luckily enough, it came out at the beginning of the season because I didn't want to wait any longer for it. I wanted to get it out right away.
When did you, I'm assuming professionally, first meet him?
It was in the early 90s, and they asked me to go out to do a story about the 30th anniversary of Dodger Stadium, which was 1992. The stadium opened in 62. And I was asked to just ask Glenn about his top 10 moments at Dodger Stadium. And that was, I'd talked to him on the phone before. And so it was a little intimidating, but he made it so comfortable just to come out, sit at the stadium with him and just talk about all these things. And the Gibson home run was still fresh. Even more fresh was this 1991 perfect game that Dennis Martinez had thrown for Montreal against the Dodgers. And so, you go pick through some things, and after it's over, he goes, "Hey, you want to go have breakfast?" And I was like, "You can't be talking to me. There must be somebody else here in the room." And he's, "No, let's just you and me, two guys having a chat." And before you know it, we're just talking, turn the recorders off, and he's just, but the interesting thing was you walk away thinking that must have been some magical moment. I can't believe that just happened. But so many other people had that experience with him. He put them so much at ease that when you looked into the spotlight that Vin Scully created, he really was turning it back on you and making you feel much more comfortable. And the funny part too is when you ask people, never meet people will say, "Don't meet your hero, you'll be disappointed." And there's so many stories about it's that Vin was even exceeding that. Anything you thought about him was even greater. And it was it just, again, fun to capture all those stories.
Give me a sense of the ideation for this book and the format that ultimately, maybe based on what I've read, this may not have been the original intent or the original design of how you were going to do this book, but a little bit about sort of the why and the when and the how, I guess, of this and how it came together.
Well, I do a very good job of saving all my interviews and transcribing and keeping them on files, and I don't trust that I can find them easy enough on the internet, and it's proving to be true. And luckily, I collected all the hard copies and the newspaper clippings and audio clips and micro recordings that I had to go find a new micro recorder just to listen back to them again. But when Vin passed away on August 2nd of 2022, I was watching the game, and Joe Davis and Jessica Mendoza came on the local Dodger broadcast and announced it. And it was just this numb feeling just hitting me like, this can't be true. But of course it's true, because that's what happens when people get old, and it's bound to happen. And we had already gone through this as a city of Los Angeles when he retired, this feeling that a grandfather had left the family. So it was kind of this whole feeling all over again. But my first instinct was to collect the things that I'd written about him, because once his passing happened, there were all these newspapers like my own and the LA Times. They would put out these collections of like the best of stories of Vin Scully that, the newspaper owned. And when my newspaper did that, my former newspaper, I realized that they had about 25 stories in their book, and 8 of them were mine. And those weren't even the best ones. So I'm thinking, well, I want to get the stuff out that I've done and more, because I know I had so much more stuff. And at that time, also, I was writing for a local publication called the Angelus News, which is the Catholic news organization of Los Angeles. And I had done 2 different profiles on Vin for them about his Catholic faith and what it meant to him, how it got him through some family tragedies and things. And so they asked me if I could write a profile of him for the magazine. And I was almost resistant to do it, because it was I felt such a heaviness on my whole being as to how am I going to generate something like this. But the more I started working on it, it was very cathartic. It was very cathartic.
That too. Yeah.
It was very cathartic to get through these notes and look at all the different aspects of his life. And to me, that was the core of the person, and everything else branched out of that, whether he was a good broadcaster or a nice person who wrote handwritten notes to people, or he did these kind gestures to people, and he inspired different people to want to be broadcasters. And the most of all, the humility that he had for even being a star in Los Angeles and Hollywood and how he handled that. So as I'm pulling all these together, I felt like I had enough material for a book. So I started pulling that together, and I realized I'm going to do some interviews. I'm going to call Bob Costas, now Michaels, and Peter O'Malley and some other people just to see if they had stories they wanted to share that I could include in my book. And the more I got from them, I go, that's a story into itself. That could help be a chapter explaining this. So this would snowball. And if I finally got a publisher to agree to do the book, they finally said, well, who else is involved? And I said, well, I've got these other people who could do essays for me. Yeah, I figured there'd be about 20 or 30 essays I could sprinkle through the book and help kind of give it some name value, because me alone, it would make it very regional. But the more people I got, the more people who would say, hey, you should talk to this person, you should talk to this person. And so by the time the book deadline came on in June of 2023, I had 67 essays that were done, and that's the same number of years that he worked for the Dodgers. So I figured there's a higher power pulling this thing together. The last essay that I included was Bud Selig, the former commissioner of baseball, and that kind of made for a nice ending since Costas was the beginning, and I had a great variety of names and people and diverse entry points into this. So that's how it kind of came together, and I just kind of went with the wave and to see how it goes. And University of Nebraska Press was nice enough to pull it together for me and had it ready by May 1st of 2024. So that's kind of how it happened. And then the response to it since then has just been fabulous. Any kind of book event I've gone to, people just want to come and tell their stories about Vin, whether it's like me, the experience is as a kid, you took the transistor radio into your bedroom and hid it under your pillow so your mom wouldn't know you were doing it. And you put in the earphones and you listened to the game, and you fell asleep, and you woke up and there was some other radio show, playing at 3 a.m. that you had no idea what it was, but you knew that the game was over somehow. And Vin had actually, kind of lulled you to sleep with the bedtime stories of the game. But that's how every kid in LA, I think, has that experience. And it just was profound to share it with so many other people who went through that. And I guess the more people I reached out to and heard their stories, where there was the actor Bryan Cranston, how he had a lot of parent issues and family issues growing up, and Vin was still the comforting voice for him. And so many other people learned English from him, and so many other people had issues in their life, and they asked, could you call somebody on my behalf and kind of tell them things are going to be okay, and he would do those kind of things. And so just that collection of stories and material just ended up forming 288 pages of material. So it's like, I guess this is how it's supposed to be, and let's just put it out there and see what happens.
So what themes emerged, and maybe ones that perhaps you didn't anticipate, right? Because clearly you had some very strong, so in some cases even personal knowledge of the story of Vin Scully, and certainly that. I mean, people also forget too. By the way, he was the pride of Fordham Prep and Fordham University.
Yes.
Good Jesuit institutions, and he's a New Yorker by trade, right? So, but
right.
In many respects, people almost sort of forget the fact that he was broadcasting way back when, even before he came to LA. But what themes kind of emerged in your as these things came in, and did you sort of have an idea that you were just looking to basically fit all these essays into, or did you find some new pathways that were sort of coming along as you got more people and, frankly, diverse, walks of life, so to speak, as contributors?
Yes, it started with, I thought the first chapter sort of had to be a common goal or a common shared experience, which is basically a guy who mastered his craft, who everyone would say this is the best broadcaster who ever was. And let's explain why people are saying that. So I knew that. Plus, I knew he was such an exceptional storyteller. So I had people try to explain what made his storytelling so effective. And then there was a lot of people who said, I listened to him. My father and I would listen to him. My grandfather was the first one to introduce me to him. Now my kids listen to him. So there was that just that connection of generations, and how he really not only connected generations, but also the city together. I think the more as I went along, I didn't realize how important history and patriotism was to him. So that became a chapter, especially when I talked to people like Gil Hodges Jr. to talk about his father, his relationship with Vin, and talking to Josh Rawitch, who used to work for the Dodgers, now is the president of the Baseball Hall of Fame. Joe Buck had some great stories too, connecting his dad, Jack Buck, with Vin in different historical moments. And then I started finding out more about the kindness and friendship that he had with certain people, and how he dealt with celebrity and fame being in Los Angeles. But I think one that kind of surprised me too was all the people who say how much he influenced them as wanting to be a broadcaster. And a lot of the people who he influenced didn't turn out to be broadcasters. They were just in the field of media or radio or television or something else that turned out to be just learning from him about how to have a beginning and an end and a middle to a story, and how to, make sure you fact check and do your homework. Because anytime you talk to Ben about, what's your secret to being a broadcaster, he would always tell you, you just have to be yourself. You have to do the work. You have to love the job, but really don't imitate anybody else, especially me, because it's pretty obvious if you're imitating Vin Scully, because it's never going to be up to that level. So as it turned out, there was 9 different sort of themes that worked out. And my goal too was not to do a biography on him, because Kurt Smith had done something of that form years ago. And I didn't want this to be a tribute book as well, because I thought that was not the right word. So I stuck on the word appreciation, because most of all the essays were talking about how much they appreciated him for teaching them a certain aspect. And it just happened to be the 9 things that fell into chapters. So I just called them 9 innings. And then we kind of went with that format.
I'm interested in some of the names. I mean, some of them are pretty obvious, right? So the Bob Costases of the world, and Bud Selig, for example, a baseball guy. But Tom Likas,
Right.
a radio guy, right? Who you would never, on the surface, sort of his somewhat caustic,
Exactly.
radio style. But yeah, I mean, there's some there, right? And whether that's in growing up or taking pointers, and would they be formally given, or frankly informally, just by being Vin Scully on the radio?
Yeah, those are the ones those are the fun finds, the nuggets and all this thing. The other nugget I found was Tom Volante, who was Vin's first broadcast director from 1952 to 1959. So he worked for Schaefer Beer and Lucky Strike. He was part of an advertising agency, and the television broadcasts were first starting. And the important thing to his company was that the beer ads and the Lucky Strike cigarette ads all got done at the right time. So Tom became the producer of the show and director of the broadcast on television. And he had no television experience at all. But then again, who did? So he became really the first director that Vin Scully and Red Barber had. So he had all this information for me about what it was like to see Vin Scully as a 22-year-old taking direction and learning from Red. And so, and Tom Volante was 95 years old when I interviewed him for this. So it was kind of another thing that I could never have known to even ask for. But that was, again, Peter O'Malley, the former Dodger owner, said I should talk to him. And Bruce Fremming, an umpire, who, again, I would never have thought of, had this great relationship with Vin, as they met once on the road. And Vin told him once, hey, when you're calling a game, could you be more clear about a ball and a strike with your signal call? Because I have to tell the people on the radio what's going on. And Bruce understood that was an important thing. And so he accommodated Vin in that respect. And they just became great friends, to where whenever Bruce Fremming was doing a game, he would look up to the press box and give Vin a wave, and this became this little relationship that they had. And Harry Shearer was the actor that I really wanted to track down the most, because on The Simpsons, when Harry Shearer would do a broadcast imitation of somebody calling a game, it always sounded like Vin Scully. And it really was this sort of homage to Vin, and the way he would do like the Springfield Isotopes, which was the team of the Simpsons. And so Harry Shearer kind of gave me some great stories about actually meeting him once, and talking about when he did characters, he was usually trying to do more cartoonish versions. But with Vin, you didn't want to make Vin look like a cartoon, so you almost did it so as a tribute to him. and how Vin got that and understood what he was trying to do. But I think you nail it with Likas. He was the one that really like came out of the blue and told me all about, as a kid growing up and seeing Vin call the 1965 World Series between the Twins and the Dodgers, and just being enamored with this, and finding out he went to Fordham. So Tom Likas went to Fordham, and Tom Likas finally came out to Los Angeles because, he wanted to have a career here, and he finally got to meet Vin, and he really didn't even know what to say to him when he met him, but just understood what Vin had meant. And so when stories like that sort of kept piling up, it was easier and easier just to sort of, who else do you know that might be a great storyteller for this? And when you talk to the people who worked with him in the booth, like Doug Mann, who was a statistician, or some of the other guys who were just with him all the time, who were never on the air, but they just knew his personality, and they knew how nice he was to them. Boyd Robertson was a stage manager, just to talk about how Boyd was basically the one who brought people into the booth to introduce him, and Boyd just kind of had to calm them down. And on top of everything else Boyd was doing as the broadcast manager, stage manager, he also had to be sort of Vin's valet and kind of take care of all the guests who kept coming in. So all these great nuggets just kept added up, and it just made for a great collection.
All right, what's this? Oldschoolshirts.com. Fantastic. You've heard me talk on and on and on about the great folks and the great wares at oldschoolshirts.com. Like the name implies, it's old school and it's shirts, and they put them together, into what they call oldschoolshirts.com. It's like the name implies, but of course we love them primarily for their sportswear. You name the league of the past, you name the team of the past, the chances are huge that they're going to have more than one shirt and different color schemes for things that you may remember from the United Football League or the Major Indoor Soccer League, or various flavors of the original XFLs, plural, or the Federal League perhaps, or maybe World Team Tennis, or maybe it was the North American Soccer League, and on and on and on. But hey, it's not just sports. It's also great cultural touchstones and memories from the past. How about the officially licensed Evel Knievel connection? How about collection? Yeah, that's what he's trying to say. Various colleges. How about dead malls of the past? Ice cream parlors, maybe even radio stations that you might remember. Hey, even there's a latest edition of the now old, Aloha Stadium commemorative shirt. All that kind of stuff and more. You will find at least a handful of shirts that you will just transport you back into your past, and you will amaze and impress your friends at the same time. It's oldschoolshirts.com, and we got a promo code for you, of course. Let's save you some dough while you go there, and its promo code is Good Seats. Good Seats. That's the promo code at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code Good Seats for 10% off all of your purchases. Hey, P.F. Wilson and your friends at oldschoolshirts.com, thank you for your sponsorship of the show. And now, back to our conversation. But I think a lot of people, both in the region and outside the region, right, just automatically just default to essentially the Dodgers of Los Angeles and Farmer John hot dogs and all that kind of stuff, right? And it can come up with all kinds of, truly, I mean, it's been there for decades, right? So it seems natural. But, I think a lot of people, especially outside the region, are probably surprised to recognize that, this is a guy who had lots of national exposure in baseball, on radio with CBS Radio, a lot of World Series calls. He had golf exposure. He played a pretty significant role. He was the number 2 team for CBS for quite a few years for the NFL. And interestingly, right, he was this close to being made into the number 1 team with John Madden back when there was basically a bake-off between him and Pat Summerall for that. So
right.
He was much more dexterous and multifaceted in terms of his sports interests and capabilities. And you even have an interesting little anecdote on your blog about a certain someone who was in the audience when you were giving a lecture, I guess, at Annenberg. You want to kind of hint on that? Because I think it also opens up a bit of a Pandora's box about how baseball was important to him, but maybe not always the number one thing on his mind when it comes to sports.
Yeah, that was pretty wild for me because I was Dan Durbin, who's a USC Annenberg communications professor, has a class that has to do with pop culture and communication and sports. And he was doing a Zoom class at the end of this past semester, and he had me in. And as I'm watching all the names pop up on the screen, there's one that says Will Scully. And I just kind of made note of it, but I didn't think that much. And so about 20 minutes into this discussion we're having about Vin Scully, Dan, the professor, says, "What do you think Vin's family thinks about the book?" And I said, "Well, I want to ask, is one of your students there is Will Scully? Is that any relation?" And he turns on his camera, and now I get to see him, and he says, "Yeah, I'm Vin's grandson. My dad is Kevin, who was Vin's second son, and my dad's been listening." And I just really, I think it's great, all the things that you're saying about my grandfather. And he just confirmed a lot of the greatness of his grandfather's experience. But he also revealed that he goes, "I'm like my grandfather. I liked football a lot much better than baseball because it's a lot of action, and baseball had too many lulls in it." So he kind of confirmed what some other people had said about Vin's love of football. And that's really where Vin actually met his second wife, Sandy, who was the secretary for Don Klosterman, the general manager of Los Angeles Rams. And Vin, living in Los Angeles, went to the office one day to do some research and interviews, and met her. And they ended up getting married and had a couple of kids themselves. And she had passed away just months before he did. So his connection to football was pretty deep. And he was a very good golfer as well. He had a few hole-in-ones himself. He was a member of Bel Air Country Club and a couple others, and great left-handed swing. And one of the things that happened later in his life, he had auctioned off a lot of his things that he didn't really need anymore, and he wanted to kind of cash it in and use the money for his grandkids, or at least, fund their scholarships and things. And one of the things that were up for auction were 2 sets of his golf clubs. And Ned Colletti, the former Dodger general manager, who did an essay for the book, told Vin that he goes, "What if I told you that I was the one who bought your golf clubs?" And Vin was so pleased to hear that they kind of stayed in the family, and they'd be well protected, because those were like another set of his kids. He just loved to play golf so much. So it was kind of comforting to hear that story that Ned had told about that. But again, I had never heard that story either, so it was just great to again hear another story about Vin that had just kind of come out of this whole book project.
All of these are original essays, correct? Or did you borrow or convert some of them? And I think you even mentioned a few that you wish you could have had, either from previous versions or anew, correct?
Right. Most of them, well, when I thought people could write essays, I thought that would be a fun thing for them to do. But then I realized so many people don't like to write, and they just agonize over it. So those who did write, wrote. Those who didn't write, I would interview them, and I would kind of craft an essay for them, and they would kind of go over it, and they'd be okay with it. And then some of them that I wanted to get in the book had already been printed, and so I thought it would be easier if I could just replicate them. But for whatever reasons, it just didn't work out because you have to pay certain rights fees and all those copyright issues and things like that. So. It turned out, I think 2 or 3 of the essays in the book had been written in previous forms, but I got permission from the author and from the publisher to reproduce them, and then they were just sort of updated with sort of a new spin on it. So they weren't completely just reprinted, but it was just an experience to try to get, and it's hard enough to get a few people to write, but then when most of the people don't want to write, or they don't have the time to do it, and you sort of commit to interviewing them and shaping it, that's a whole nother layer of work that really I didn't expect doing, but I pulled it off because I was so used to deadline writing and just being persistent and getting it done that it came about well. I think of the people who I wasn't able to get, I reached out to Ron Sheldon, the filmmaker who did Bull Durham, and I knew that he was really good friends with Kevin Costner because they did Tin Cup, and Kevin did this great emceed one of Vin's last days. They had a big event for him at Dodger Stadium, and Kevin was great because Kevin was also he played the role of Billy Chappell as a Detroit Tiger pitcher and For Love of the Game. And Vin was the broadcaster in the movie, and Vin basically, called a perfect game that Kevin Costner was pitching on a film. So they had this great connection as well. I couldn't get a hold of Kevin because he was busy with Yellowstone and all those other things that are going on. So I just kind of had to learn to roll with what I had, and I knew that whatever came through would come through. And then the best part, I think, is setting up a website that allows people to, if you read the book and you want to contribute an essay or a memory yourself, there's plenty of time to still kind of be part of this whole circle of storytelling. So, hopefully I'll circle back and get some of these other guys to tell stories as well. But I think it was just the book part of it was just had its own sort of separate deadline, but I think it can still keep going as a website, and who knows what after that, what else we can craft, because I know Vin's 100th birthday will be sometime in 2027. So there's still time. I think there's probably a celebration for that. Maybe we can do something at the Baseball Hall of Fame, or, just kind of keep his memory alive. And again, keep alive the qualities that he still lives in people. And, not just the great broadcaster, the great storyteller, but really a much better man, a man whose actions really spoke louder than his words, and kind of keep that memory alive.
I suspect that this is something that you could continue to do, a volume 2 kind of thing, right? Just because there's so many probably people, maybe especially as memorials, like a 100th anniversary or of his what would have been his 100th birthday come about, right? Because people might be reminded anew just how great he was.
Sure. Oh yeah, I think it's when I just decided to do it as this book project, I think right away I learned that there's a lot of people I can't capture, and a lot of people will see this and want to contribute more. So I'll have to figure out a way to just keep it alive. And I know his family is planning on some sort of a media project as well. And it'll be interesting to see. I'm sure they have home movies and photographs and things and stories of their own. So whatever they do, and they knew about this project I was working on, and then they knew it would be complementary to whatever they decide to do. So there's all kinds of Scully retrospectives, I think, that will be coming up later in years. And to me, it reminded me a lot about John Wooden, the UCLA basketball coach. And I think if you Google John Wooden and book, you'll find there's probably a dozen or more books done about him. And it's mostly my relationship with John Wooden and things I learned from him. And because he was such a great teacher as well as a basketball coach. And of course, Vin Scully and John Wooden were friends too. They lived in Los Angeles back in the 50s. They lived in the same apartment building. So it's not a stretch to think that those two were connected all the time and had such a reverence for each other. But they were classy gentlemen, and so they understood. They came from that era where you wore a pocket square, and you handled yourself in a certain way, and you had discussions in certain ways, and you were always just define the word classy. And when you look back on those kind of people, you just go, of course, that's the kind of person I wish I could be. I could be a little less judgmental, a little more understanding, give people a little more time to just tell them, their experiences that they want to share with you, and it's just kind of be present. And it's a lesson in today's world where we have such sometimes caustic dialogue and wanting to pick sides and things, and just to kind of read back about how Vin handled certain things, and even John Wooden too, that I'm sure there'll be more books about Vin that come out about experiences people had with him. And so that's just kind of something to look forward to, I think, as the years go by and going forward.
Well, speaking of books, though, there's an interesting little you have a little interesting twist on I guess the if you could call it sort of the baseball bio of him by Kurt Smith. Right now,
right?
So Kurt Smith has done a lot of Voices of the Game. He's done a lot of work over the many years about sort of the broadcasting component of baseball, and arguably is this sort of a go-to reference and resource. But from what you have written in your blog and stuff, I get the sense that not everybody thinks that was either the full story or maybe even the best telling of the story, including, do I have this right, Vin himself?
Yes, because for many years, and that's Ron Rappaport wrote the foreword of my book and explained, for many years Vin turned down requests to do book projects. And in Los Angeles at those times, everybody was doing Drysdale, Koufax, Maury Wills, everybody related to anything with fame was doing book projects. And Vin would always have different reasons for not wanting to do it. One, I think it was because he just didn't want to spend the time doing it. He didn't have an ego to feed that would lend itself to doing a book. He always said hey, it was good enough for Walter O'Malley to never do a book, so Vin decided he wouldn't do it either. Eventually, biographies have been done about Walter O'Malley and all the things that he's done. And his son Peter has set up this phenomenal website that has all of Walter O'Malley family archives and notebooks and things. And he just recently donated a lot of that, 70 boxes of material to the Baseball Hall of Fame so that people now can research if they want to do the ultimate Walter O'Malley book. But Vin was a very private person as well, and he didn't want a lot of the things come out. Especially he had his first wife pass away with a prescription drug overdose, and it was accidental death. And then he had a son, Michael, who died in a helicopter crash. And so there were things that he just didn't want out there. So I think when Curt Smith approached him, Vin had said, hey, listen, I've already turned down all these other guys. I know, you're important, but I'm not interested in doing it. So Curt did what a biographer would do. He just talked to everybody else in his circle. Although a lot of people, when they were contacted by Curt, said, I talked to Vin, and Vin really doesn't want me to talk about, him. So I'm not gonna do it. So Curt did a lot of cutting and pasting with archives and things that he could do. And so as a result, the book came out, and Vin told me, he goes, I'm not endorsing it. I'm not real happy about it. But Curt could justify it by saying Vin was a public figure, and public figures, no matter what they say or not say, they're open for a biography. So that kind of just happened. So I knew that asking Vin to do a book was never going to happen in his lifetime. So that's, again, when he passed away, I knew that whatever book material I had, and I didn't have any, tell-all out of tale stories about him, and nobody really did either. So he never really had a problem if somebody did a book about him that told a lot of how he dealt with a lot of family tragedies. The Curt Smith book was very difficult to read anyway. It's written in a very interesting, I guess I'll call it.
He can be kind of dense.
Yeah, well, it's very choppy, and it doesn't flow well, and so it's just kind of there. So, as far as Vin not wanting to be part of that, I could understand, but I also thought it wasn't really well done either. But the interesting thing was when I pitched this book idea to University of Nebraska Press, they now own the rights to the Curt Smith book, so they felt, and they just had a recent biography done on Red Barber. So they felt like this would kind of fit within their, a collection of Scully, Barber kind of books. So I guess I lucked out in them having that kind of package deal. But otherwise, I was always writing the book thinking I'm not doing this to sort of please Vin, but I want to make his family know how much of an impact he had. If they didn't know that, if Vin didn't want to know that when he was alive, I think I would really like his family to know that as they're reading this now, and as they're getting it, like with Will Scully and other daughters of Vin's who's reached out to me, they're all pretty happy with it. So that makes me feel like I accomplished the goal I was trying to do as well with that.
I love also too how you've you do, it's not just pure essay after pure essay. You also kind of set up the tone for certain themes in this book, and I am particularly drawn to the things that are likely, and I've not read it, so I can't speak. Probably not in the Curt Smith biography, but the various other completely forgotten parts of his career that were not only in sports but outside of sports. Like, so for example, the hosting this It Takes Two show in 1969, this sort of a game show kind of thing, a celebrity couple, is almost somewhat of a semi precursor to Tattletales. People remember that in the 70s.
Exactly.
My friend here is named Duke, and he happens to be a Labrador retriever. They make very good pets and were ordinarily bred for hunting originally. They're strong swimmers. They're very good in the water. Another Labrador named Adjutant lived in England happens to hold an additional distinction which makes him rather unique among all dogs. So let's separate our panel now. We'll find out if you know something about dogs, and particularly a Labrador named Adjutant. Adjutant was born on August the 14th, 1936. What makes him unique is simply this. He went on to live longer than any other dog in recorded history. So the question then is, how long did Adjutant live? How many years old do you think was the oldest dog ever? You have 10 seconds.
And this one was just an eyebrow raiser that I never would have known through any kind of biography because nobody sort of focuses on it. But he actually hosted something in '73, which you call out, called the Vin Scully Show for CBS. That was ostensibly a competition or a competitive response to the Mike Douglas Show, which was growing amongst housewives during the '70s as a sort of a mid-afternoon sort of entertainment kind of show for the quote unquote housewife set.
From Television City in Hollywood, ladies and gentlemen, Vin Scully.
Thank you so very much. Very nice of you. Thank you. Thank you. Fine. Thank you so very, very, very much, and how nice that you could join us this afternoon. I was going to say we have a great show, but I have really gotten afraid of the word great. Really, I just never use it anymore. I had a friend of mine who had a hearing problem, and a couple of days later I saw him, and he said to me, I have the greatest hearing aid in the world. He said, I can hear a leaf fall a block away. A drop of water in the basin sounds like an explosion. I can hear tears 3 houses away. It is the greatest hearing aid I have ever had. I said, what kind is it? He said, about 8:45. Anyway. Oh, that's all right. No, you're friends, so, a smile and a nod. That's fine, that's fine. Our guest today, I just can't wait to get him out of here, so I'm not going to waste any more time, is Mr. Carroll O'Connor, and we'll have him here in 1 minute, right after this message.
It only lasted 3 months, but, he's in L.A., right? So a lot of these kinds of opportunities probably presented themselves. He probably turned down more of them than he probably would have cared to admit. I would have loved personally to find out a little bit more about like what else he was pitched and, maybe some of the stuff he actually turned down versus actually tried to pursue while still trying to maintain, this very prodigious sports broadcasting career.
Yeah, in Los Angeles, if you're a broadcaster, and this is where the TV shows were made, Television City, CBS, and so what producers of game shows realized were that sportscasters could really think on their feet, and they had a personality, and they could get a show, an unscripted show, moving along just by being with their experience. And so the other entry point I had in this, I did a book with Tom Kelly, who was the USC broadcaster of football during the 60s and during their heyday. And Tom Kelly was the backup to Monty Hall on Let's Make a Deal.
Oh, no kidding.
So he knew he explained to me how all this works. So he and Scully and Dick Enberg would do game shows as well.
Oh, Dick Enberg did Celebrity Sweepstakes. You remember that?
All kinds of things. Chick Hearn, the great great Laker broadcaster, did Celebrity Bowling for Dollars, which was a huge game show here in Los Angeles. Very funny.
You almost said Celebrity Bowling, but that's okay. I'm not going to.
Celebrity Bowling was another show.
No, the whole thing. Well, actually, I think Vin Scully was on that. I think he was on an episode of that, if I'm not mistaken.
It would not surprise me, because a lot of his golf buddies were the people he would have on the game show, like James Gardner and I'm blanking on some names, but Gene Kelly, and he would know all these guys from golfing with them. So they would come with their wives on these game shows. And it was just like a perfect natural progression of his life, because he had fun with people. He could make these things work, and he could kibitz with people. Bob Newhart, James Gardner, Jack Nicholson, Mac Davis, Sean Connery. I mean, these are all people he golfed with. So he did that as a daytime thing, and then he would do game shows, or then he would do the games at night and he and Enberg were very good friends too. So Enberg was also involved in movies and TV shows like that too. So they all had these great stories that they could tell about having to do something during the day and then be at the game in the night and then come back and do that. So I'm sure Vin could have hosted Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune or anything like that now that a guy like Pat Sajak, made a career out of just doing that. But it's if you go to Vin's Internet Movie Database, it's pretty well stocked, and YouTube has a lot of interesting clips of shows like that he was on with Phyllis Diller and all these other 60s kind of Hollywood people that he just hung out with. And there was he was probably part of Dean Martin roasts and things like that just were big during that time, but he assimilated into that community, but he never felt he was part of it, even though he really was, because he was so well known and so much known for Los Angeles, that it is kind of funny to look back and to think of all the things that he was involved with, just as a guy holding a microphone and trying to get something, crazy out of Dick Shawn or Jack Warden or somebody on a game show.
As one does. So, all right. So, but I guess you sort of hinted at it before. He wouldn't consider himself, probably, if he were still alive today, a celebrity per se, right? What was he? Would you argue from what you've read from the submissions and your knowledge of his career and stuff? Do you get a sense that he was uncomfortable with that sort of celebrity tag?
I think he understood it, but he didn't want to be defined by that. He really wanted to be defined as a family man, somebody who worked hard at his craft, somebody who knew the importance of big events. And so I think the whole celebrity part was just, if he was in Kansas City or something, he would have the same career, but it just wouldn't involve all the TV and movie sort of stuff that came on the fringes of it. So it was another layer of his life that he had to deal with. And I think he dealt with it just fine. I don't think he ever thought he was bigger than anything else. And he was, again, that kind of led to a chapter about his humility and how he sort of always found a way to shine the spotlight on somebody else. And I think that's what made him probably a good host, because it really was about the contestant or the celebrity or somebody else that he could sort of elevate. And that was what he was more comfortable doing.
And how do you think he'd take to this book?
I would hope that he would understand why it was important to do. I guess his family is a great reflection of that. I don't think he would be embarrassed by it, but I think he would be humbled by it. And I think that's really when friends of mine now pass away and you go to their funerals and you hear people talking all these great things about them, you wish they were there to sort of hear, like, look at the impact you made on our lives and how we're going to remember you. And Vin, I hope he got a sense of that, but I hope it was not just because of people gushing over him and wanting to say, oh, I loved your voice. And because he heard all those stories all the time, but I don't think he understood the impact that he made on especially those who got into the craft themselves. So my hope is that, if not understanding how he would have responded to this, is just hearing his family's response. And that's the most comforting part about knowing that this was a project that was worth doing. It was important to do. It was not kind of let somebody else do it, but I felt like I had enough material and connections to get it done quickly and get it done right. So, it's a satisfying experience for anybody who picks it up now and says, yeah, I really enjoyed that. And it's not a difficult read. You can skip around, and it's something that I think resonates with all different people on all different entry points.
All right, last question, and I'm going to let you promote. Did you learn anything new about him, or that just took you by abject surprise, given these essays as they came in, perhaps versus what you thought you knew, or what generally everybody thinks they knew about Vin Scully, his life, his career, et cetera?
I think I just realized he's a regular guy. He had flaws as well, but they didn't define him. So if he got upset or his ego got in the way of something, he learned from it. And if, there was some job that he wanted and someone else got the job, he didn't fuss over it that much. He just sort of understood that was, maybe it wasn't meant to be. And I think that, again, that goes back to his belief in if you want to make God smile, tell him your plans, because it never works out that way. But I think he really appreciated how his kind of life fell into place, and he was able to sort of be there at great moments, and he was there to be for his family, and he was there to be for people who needed him. So I think whatever I thought I knew about him, it was taken up 10 levels just by having so many other people reinforce their stories and kind of make me feel like, okay, I got a small piece of that. You did too. And let's all kind of put this together. So I don't know if I learned anything new. I just learned a lot of interesting kind of anecdotes and things, but it was mostly, I didn't realize the greater impact he made on so many different people. And that was the most satisfying part about it.
And last hot take from you. Do you think his not getting that number one announcing job for football on CBS? I mean, that sounds like the ultimate in his career expression of disappointment, maybe a little even anger and frustration.
Yeah, I think so.
And moving on, and arguably maybe the best thing that ever happened to him, because not only the NBC stuff that came along, but he was Mr. LA at that point afterwards, the Dodgers and otherwise.
No, I agree. I read some things about that, and I don't know if I included them in the book, because what I tried to do too is, since it's not a biography, I put in a timeline that sort of reference points different things to put different things in context. And when I think about that 1982 season when he didn't get the job, they gave it to Summerall. What I remember reading is that Scully and his wife went on a vacation to Hawaii, and he said, I didn't even watch the Super Bowl. I didn't care. I just said, I'm done. And just focused on baseball. And it just happened that, the rotation of NBC and CBS and how the national baseball package worked, it came around to where he could focus back on that again. So while NBC had the Major League Baseball at that time, and he was working for CBS, it kind of just came full circle again for him, where he could just focus back on baseball and golf again for another network. So again, he just sort of trusted that was the time to bow out. And I think at one point he said, I was just happy to get off that merry-go-round for a while, because it really was time consuming. And he really did realize how much time it was taking away from his family. And now he could sort of just hone in on just the Dodgers. And again, I guess one of those weird things that I didn't realize until I was doing the book too, was that he had been a Dodger broadcaster for 33 years when the National Baseball Hall of Fame voted him a lifetime broadcasting award for his career. He then broadcast another 34 years after that. So he had really 2 lifetimes of material just as far as baseball broadcasting was concerned. But that second half, I think, is when he really could concentrate again on the Dodgers and devote his time to that as much as he could, home games, road games, whatever he wanted to do. So that allowed him to have those full 67 years.
Well, I was delighted with this book. I wasn't really sure what to expect with it, right? But when you go through it and you see just the variety of voices that have contributed to it, and even if you don't sort of fully, you don't consider yourself maybe a baseball fan, but especially if you are, or if you know, I don't think there's anybody who doesn't know, even just in general pop culture, who Vin Scully was.
Right.
This is a fabulous. I wouldn't even call it supplement. I think it's even a lot of its foreground. It's almost biographical in its essence, because it gives such a varied set of opinions and remembrances of him that gives a much fuller picture, I think, than any sort of straightforward, if you will, narrative biography would. So at the very least, it's a complimentary thing to anything that's biographical about him out there. And I would argue it's a hell of a lot more than that, because there's so much more, I guess, rich brew here that only comes out with first person narratives like these. I think it's a great concept, and maybe you're onto something formulaically for other topics. Are you working on any other topics similarly or whatever?
Nothing similar. I'm really interested in Southern California sports history, and I've always had a fascination with jersey numbers. So what I think I'm working on now is a project that attaches a story to every jersey number you can think of from 0 to 99. And it's not the person you actually think of that number or that biography. So for instance, if you talk about the number 23, it's famous for Kirk Gibson, and David Beckham played for the LA Galaxy or wore 23, and a lot of other famous people wore 23 in Southern California sports. But I find this great picture of Richard Nixon at Whittier College wearing number 23 and playing football there in the 40s. And I go, that is the story I want to do it on.
Yeah, and lamenting he's not in the Ivy Leagues, right?
So there's so many great stories about people who wore a certain jersey number. They became attached to it. And then you also learn about a different area of Los Angeles or Southern California where they grew up. So him and Whittier. And so it's a book I'm still in the makings, but I think it's funny now that the number 67 is worn by so many people at Dodger games, it's easy to put Vin Scully in the number 67 slot and sort of tell his story about, being in Los Angeles, coming to Brentwood for the first time as a Navy reserve and getting a tour of California, getting a tour of Southern California as a 20-year-old and now coming back to move here with the Dodgers, and he moves into this Brentwood neighborhood where John Wooden's living. So there's all these other great stories you can tell about numbers and people and what numbers mean to certain people. So that's kind of what I'm trying to form now. But somehow whatever I'm doing, it all kind of circles back to Scully. So.
Well, will any of them dance into some of these forgotten teams like the Avengers or the Express or the Aztecs or the Strings?
Absolutely. George Best, number 11, or, Steve Young wearing number 8 for the LA Express. Sure. All these guys are part of the Southern California roster, especially for colleges that have no longer have teams or football teams anymore, like, Loyola Marymount or Loyola football with Don Klosterman and just Cal State Fullerton and all these other teams that had great programs or memorable programs and now have disappeared. So very much so our jersey numbers and names from teams that have gone and trying to bring them back, especially high school numbers too. High school numbers. John Elway wore number 11 at Granada Hills High School and made a career, that led him to Stanford and to bigger things. So it sort of tells the story of what high school football was like, for number 11, that kid. So lots of fun just connecting names and numbers.
All right. Well, to the extent that happens and when it's out, you promise to come back and play with us a little bit and talk about
that. Would be a lot of fun. Oh, yes, very much so.
All right. Our thanks to Tom. Great book, worth getting. Please do. It is called Perfect Eloquence, an appreciation of Vin Scully. 67, count them, essayists, one representing each season of Vin Scully's career calling games for the Dodgers from 1950 through 2016. All kinds of reflections about his professional and private life, and from people who knew him well or didn't know him at all, or various folks in between, players and journalists and celebs and historians and others, fans, just simple fans of the game, etc. Really excellent understanding of the man that was the great Vin Scully. Again, you can get it wherever good books are found. Perhaps your independent bookseller down the street would be appreciative of you patronizing them and having them order it for you as well. But of course, the easiest way you can get it, and the quickest way, frankly, is to go to our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Make sure you spell it all out correctly. Find this episode, which is numbered 352, with Tom Hoffarth and me. And you will find a couple of convenient links to the book. I believe not only hardcover version, but the Kindle version as well. And it is published by our good friends at the University of Nebraska Press. They do good stuff, and we love featuring a lot of their great books around sports and history, and especially the forgotten versions that they seem to specialize in. So we love them especially and doubly. You can follow Tom on the Twitter X, whatever they're calling it this week, at Tom Hoffarth. So it's at Tom. Tom Hoffarth is spelled Hoffarth, at Tom Hoffarth. Pretty easy. Follow him online on his various websites, 2 of them actually. One is called fartheroffthewall.com. Farther, F-A-R-T-H-E-R, off the wall, all one word, .com, /blog. Check out the blog there, and you'll see what he's up to now in terms of new ideas for books and such. As well as some various outtakes and anecdotes from the compilation of the book that we just talked about, Perfect Eloquence. You can also follow the doings of the book specifically and Tom's various PR and personal appearances and stuff at Vin Scully Appreciation Book, all one word, .com. Vin Scully, Scully, Appreciation Book, Vin Scully Appreciation Book.com. While you're doing the digital thing, goodseatsstillavailable.com, our website, make sure you check out our merch section. You can buy us a cup of coffee if you'd like to just give us a little hat tip of love. A couple of bucks, say thank you. We don't really shake you down too much for payment around these parts, but if you feel inclined, like what you've been hearing of late, feel free to give us a little couple of shekels. We appreciate that. We'll put that in our payment box for the various servers and electricity and web connections that we need to get the show to you every week. We appreciate that. And check out our merch section too. Lots of stuff from our pals at 503 Sports, that's what it's formerly known as, but now known as Royal Retros. I'll always know them as 503 Sports. It's just because that's the name. They started with us 7 years ago, and we love them as whatever form they want to be in. They're now called Royal Retros, of course, royalretros.com. And also our friends at oldschoolshirts.com. Two great places to find shirts and jerseys and all that kind of stuff, as well as another link with our pals at TeePublic, where you can get all kinds of similar garb from various teams and leagues of the past, as well as our own little small line of merchandise featuring our Good Seats Still Available logo. What else? Jerry Payne Audio Excellence. Thank you for your kind service this week. And if you're following us on socials, by all means, you'll find us on Twitter X at Good Seats Still, and just about everywhere else at Good Seats Still Available. And one last thing, if you want to send us email, go ahead. Hello at goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's the address for that. All right, we're done. Thank you for listening. And until next week, take care of yourselves and stay cool, everybody. Happy summer.
You've become one of the most recognizable voices in the game of baseball, but an announcer here, Vin Scully, has just established a legacy that may never be equaled. You do a great impersonation of Vin Scully. Could we hear that?
Yeah, Vinny, the greatest broadcaster in my estimation that there is and ever was. And when you think of Vinny, is that distinctive voice that's just unmistakable. And most of us, we just speak English. We say, me, Charlie Steiner, Rick Monday, we say, here's the 1-1 pitch, a curveball, outside, ball 2, right? But Vinny's much more elegant than that, right? Vinny's like, the 1-1 pitch on the way, curve low, ball 2. And, I'll never forget when he paid me this great compliment at a big banquet one night. He said, John Miller over here is the best baseball broadcaster in America in his price range. Wow. Thanks, Vin.
Hey, and what about the Japanese and the Spanish version of Vin Scully that you do?
Well, young broadcasters who wanted to be baseball broadcasters often would try to imitate Vin Scully, figuring, well, he's the best, so I want to sound like him. And that was a tribute to Vin. And I really did not realize that his fame had spread worldwide until I went to Tokyo back in the 80s, and I really wanted to hear the voice of the Tokyo Giants, Genshiro Asami. And, like yourself, I knew of Asami-san, but I'd never heard Asami-san. So I turned on the television with a great expectation to at long last hear the legendary voice of the Tokyo Giants, and he put me off a little bit because he was doing Vinny. Watashi wa Korakuen Stadium ni orimasu. Hajime mashite dozu yoroshiku lo. Ball 2. It was like kind of astounding, really. And same thing down in Venezuela. I heard the great legendary voice of baseball in Caracas, Venezuela, and he was like, El partido de béisbol con Farmer Juan, con hamburguesa con queso, muy mejor en todo el mundo. So.